What is up, everybody? I'm here once again with Casey, and we're going to be discussing all kinds of stuff relating to performance and diets. A nutritional expert is what Casey is with that context in mind. And so Liz is the perfect person to talk to about any topics relating to how we can get better with our performances when we're gaming through our food choices and otherwise. So Casey, we it's great to have you back. We left off, I suppose, having spoken about some supplements, and we also talked about hydration. So we got some good foundational stuff in there. There's lots of foundational knowledge, I think, to still establish. And today I really wanted to talk about the game day nutrition, because that's something that no one really does talk about, and everyone has their own sort of rituals. But I'm in talking to you in the past, there's definitely some do's and there's definitely some don'ts. So where would you like to start the conversation in terms of, I have a competition that I'm going to be playing, it's a week out, it's a couple of days out. What should I be doing to maximize my ability to perform going into game day and during game day?
Yeah, it's a great topic because I get this question all the time. Is it okay if I do a little bit of like foundational nutrition science? Is that okay?
Absolutely, yeah. Science us away.
Yeah. So, okay. The first thing I just want to highlight is the macronutrients, like just in general, the macronutrients. And the macronutrients, to define those, are simply the stuff that we have to eat in large quantities in order to survive. This is in contrast to micronutrients, which are things that we have to consume in relatively smaller quantities, and they still, help us survive in those kind of things. But the macros, most people are familiar with these. It's your carbs, your proteins, and your fats. Each of these has key roles in what it does for the human body, as well as for the brain and for cognitive function. So I just want to highlight like some of the roles that each of these have, because I think that helps dictate the why behind what I recommend in the future. So to start, I'll just mention carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are relatively simple. A lot of times people are getting these from their starches, things like rice and potatoes and breads and fruits and certain kind of starchy vegetables like potatoes. So those are our traditional carbohydrates. And the really interesting thing about carbohydrates is that your brain relies on them tremendously. Your brain actually, if it had the choice, the two fuel sources that it uses almost exclusively are carbohydrates and ATP. So ATP is just this energy molecule. I could talk about that if anybody's curious, but in short, those are the two fuel sources that the brain really likes to use. And a lot of people come to me and they say, oh, well, what about a ketogenic diet where I eliminate all my carbohydrates? My brain still functions then. What's going on? And your brain and your body have these primary systems and these like secondary systems. And so when you are on a ketogenic diet, your brain no longer gets access to all of the wonderful carbs that you would be eating. And so what it has to do, two things. One, it has to make its own carbohydrates, which your body can do. Or two, it has to break down other things in order to get a secondary like backup fuel source. And so this would be in the form of ketone bodies in the form of a ketogenic diet. So as like a backup generator, your body can use ketones, but it's not the primary fuel source. So even if you were on a ketogenic diet for like 30 years and you were super keto adapted, the second you eat a piece of fruit or a piece of bread or something, your brain is going to immediately still try to suck up those carbohydrates in place of the ketone bodies. So that should tell you that your brain likes to rely on a very specific fuel source. It likes to rely on these carbohydrates as well as these ATP molecules. So I just want to highlight that there because I think that's really important to note, is that brain fundamentally runs on carbohydrates, specifically glucose when it gets broken down. But some other things that carbohydrates do that not a lot of people like to talk about is carbohydrates are associated with your mood as well. And I know a lot of gamers, myself included, who suffer from, stressors and, tilt and all this kind of stuff. And carbohydrates are also associated with immune health. So carbs have, a slew of benefits. They're not necessarily evil, and that seems to be the case that we're demonizing them these days. I would say it's very easy to find a bad, unhealthy carb type, but that doesn't mean that carbs themselves are evil, like per se. Okay, so I just want to get that out of the way. That all makes sense, I hope.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah, for sure.
Nice. So then the next one is protein. And whenever I ask people, I'm like, yo, what does protein do? Everyone's like, oh, it helps me build muscle. I'm like, okay, what else does it do? and usually I get like blank faces. No one knows what protein does. And then I even hear a lot of people who say, "Oh, isn't it true that protein, you can only absorb a certain amount of it before it's wasted?" It's like, "Oh, I ate 50 grams of protein. Most of that's going to be wasted because it was too much in a single sitting," which is actually not true. There's a lot more nuance there. But the thing I want to highlight about protein, so this is just, traditionally most people will associate protein with their animal products, like your eggs, your meats, your poultry, your seafood. But also there are vegetarian sources. You look at things like lentils and legumes, tofu and soy and all this kind of stuff. But the thing I want to highlight about protein is that protein isn't good just for muscles. Okay. Protein is also the raw building block for a good chunk of your neurotransmitters. So the way that your brain actually functions is, it sends these little communication molecules between itself, and it needs to talk and do things, and it does that by way of these neurotransmitters. And we actually have data that shows that if you are deficient in certain amino acids or certain pieces of protein, that you can significantly alter the neurotransmitter composition in your brain, and it's usually to the detriment. So like if you're deficient in these, then like you can mess up the concentration of the stuff in your brain. And we want your brain to be functioning at peak during competition and just during in general if you're a high performing, cognitive kind of worker. Protein also helps build hormones. Hormones are very important. Protein also has a raw energetic use. So even if you did eat, 10,000 grams of protein in a sitting, it's not like all of that is just going to come out the other end. You're going to get the energy out of that as well. Protein also is important for immune function, which is really important for, just staying healthy and being able to show up and compete, right? So protein does a lot of things outside of just muscle. So protein is also pretty fundamental to just overall health and performance. And I want to make sure that people understand that as well. And then the last one, which is probably the one that gets the least attention, which is fat. Fat by far is the most neglected macro in esports, in that no one talks about it, no one mentions it. In other realms, it's kind of just like the third thing, and no one really just wants to think about it for some reason. But the brain is really interesting because we talked about how the brain is mostly water last time. And if you dehydrate the brain, then, so like if you pull out all the water in the brain and you look at what's left over after you pull out the water, what's left over is actually tissue, or it's a type of tissue type that is the fattiest organ that we have outside of pure fat tissue. So your brain is just like fat plus water is kind of what it is. And so the actual hardware of your brain is made up of fats. And one of the most common ones that's in there, it makes up a pretty significant portion, is what's called DHA, which some people might have heard. It's a type of omega-3 fatty acid, which is found in fatty fish and things like that. But it's really interesting because the actual hardware of your brain is literally just these fat molecules. So if you want your brain to be able to function at its peak, right? If you go from like a shitty old computer to brand new computer with brand new parts, the same thing with your brain. And so when I was a kid, what they told me was that your brain is static and you're born with all the neurons you're ever going to have. And if you bump your head, you lost it for life. That's what I was told. And that's strictly untrue. In esports, what we see is that the demographic skews kind of younger, right? So they're on average, you're not seeing like 40, 50-year-olds in this scene. And there is significant, such a high amount of changeover in the brain that's occurring, through your 20s and somewhat into your 30s even, where your brain is just growing and building and doing things. And then even after that, even after like the brain is fully set and developed, even after that, there are parts of the brain that are undergoing neurogenesis across the entire lifespan. Okay, the entire life, you have areas of your brain that are undergoing changeover. And in order for that to happen at an efficient level, in order for your brain to have, peak hardware, peak processing speed, peak resilience to injury and stressors, you have to be consuming a suitable amount of these healthy fats in order to build it. The brain is going to build the brain out of whatever's laying around. And it's a little bit like input equals output. If you input hot Cheetos and garbage, then the output is going to be similarly garbage. You really do want to make sure that you're prioritizing these, because quite literally the physical structure of the brain is built up of these fats. So that's really important. I want to highlight that. The second thing about fats is they are the precursor for most of our hormones. Hormones instrumental to how you feel, to your performance, to energy levels, to all sorts of things. So all three of these macros have instrumental, elements about them that really make them impactful for both your health and your performance. So I just want to make sure that we have that understanding underway before I mention, okay, what am I actually going to recommend on game day? Is that did I cover that suitably and hopefully not too long?
No, that's perfect. I think it's really no, I agree. So it's very important for people to have like a good actual definition of what these things are. And I think much like with the hydration video, I think one of the things that helps me a lot, and why I think I really enjoy our conversations and to pursue content like this is because without doing that, I don't have enough of the real reasons as to why I should be doing whatever. It's for me, it's not enough to be like, well, obviously this is good, and that's good. I know I need to know more. So
Yeah.
I'm hopeful that other people will enjoy that foundational kind of groundwork as we go deeper into all of this. Now that you're able to take that next step, and with that next step, what's the best framing moving forward? In terms of how you would like to talk about things, because we could just start with game day itself, but do you
Yeah.
think that we need to actually go a little bit further outside of that?
I think we can talk on game day, but well, so everything that I just said is strictly true. And I think that if you're abiding by those very general, implications from what I'm talking about for the carbs, the proteins, and the fats, I think that will give you a rough guideline. Like, you can probably make some guesses as to what I'd say for what your day to day should look like. Competition day is definitely distinct from a training day, and I do want to highlight that there are some key differences between those two. So the first key difference is just, what is the goal of that, right? So like on a training day, your goal is not peak performance. I get butthurt when I don't do too hot on a training day, or like if I'm playing with friends or whatever. But at the end of the day, a training day, a scrim day, the goal is not peak performance. The goal is to learn and get better, and that's it, right? Simply put, just to get better on a training day. That's really all you're trying to do. On competition day, on the other hand, your goal is peak performance, right? So those are two separate goals, and because of that, we have separate recommendations. So for the training piece, I think everything that I said is highly applicable, because I want you to maximize, your brain consolidation, muscle memory. I want you to be able to your brain to be processing everything appropriately, and so on. On game day, some interesting things happen, and there's high stress environment, and there's a lot of physiological changes that come along with that. And so the nutrition recommendations on game day are somewhat different from what I would recommend on a training day. Now, I do think most people are probably most interested in game day nutrition, so I think we can talk there, and then if we want to, we can venture out to maybe some other days or other scenarios. So the first thing I want to highlight about game day, your goal is peak performance, right? Like, that's at the end of the day, that's really what we're trying to go for, is we really just want to win. And so we need to leverage everything we possibly can. We also probably care to some degree about learning, especially in multi-day tournaments, right? You want to be better, hopefully, on day 2 than you are on day 1. Hopefully you've learned from that. But at the end of the day, that's the distinguishing line that I want to set. And so if we're talking about competition, you can't look at it in a vacuum. And we do have to look at our nutrition starting the day before. Okay, so nutrition for game day starts one day before game day. You can't start it on game day and hope everything goes well. And I see a lot of esports teams who I'm not going to name names. I see a lot of esports teams, especially during travel, where they fall victim to this, where they land and then they're very excited. They go travel, they go have some fun food, and they're just like sightseeing and all this and that, and they're not treating it like it's a work experience. They're treating it like a vacation. And then the next day, they hope to be all serious and buttoned up. And I've seen a lot of teams where they party the night before, then their sleep is impaired. Some of them are in the bathroom. Some of them are, hungover. Some of them are had some dangerous street food, and now they're throwing up all night or something. So I see a lot of mistakes made on the day before a big competition, because normally travel is involved, especially for the really big tournaments, right? And you having traveled to a lot of tournaments, you probably have some stories too, I would guess, of maybe some teams where you've seen them kind of go out and have a little bit too much fun. Is that fair?
Oh, absolutely, and even for me personally, when I was doing casting and going event to event and all of that, I could understand there are very specific things that I did or did not do that would impact my ability to perform, because similarly it is performance in front of like a lot of people, and you can really fuck that up, honestly. and you can definitely do a bad job. I think the fans wouldn't notice as much as to when a commentator might internally be thinking, oh, I'm doing a really shit job here, but
Yeah.
it's very obvious to us. And when you're traveling, it's very, very easy to make some basic mistakes that can have huge outcomes in terms of performance. So it is a really big deal. And I have to say though, there are some outliers. Some people who can just do every terrible thing and be able to perform still really well the next day. Would never advise that, but I've seen it happen. Obviously,
Yeah.
that's inconsistent ultimately, so we don't want that.
Yeah, yeah, and I would argue that a lot of those people who can do that are succeeding despite those choices and not because of those choices.
Mm,
And that's not to
yeah,
say that they couldn't have done even better. Even if they took first place, maybe they could have taken a more convincing first place if they had buttoned up what they were doing the day before.
yeah, very fair.
Um,
Yeah.
and so anyway, so what I want to highlight is like the day before is where it starts. And some of the key things that you do on the nutrition front, you don't try any new food. Okay, don't try some food that you've never had before in your life. Like, what if you just learned the night before that you're deathly allergic to food X from country Y? Like, that would suck, right? So don't try any new food the night before. Don't do anything that is going to mess you up. I can't tell you, for whatever reason, I don't know why it is, but people who are like people who have allergies to things, usually they know, okay, I have an allergy to peanuts. I'm not going to eat peanuts. But for whatever reason, the lactose intolerant crowd, they're like, I'm gonna eat a pint of ice cream and I know what's gonna happen. It's gonna be awful, but it's worth because it tastes great. And I don't know why the lactose intolerant crowd does this, but so maybe they're out and they're going to eat some ice cream or eat some dairy, have some pizza, whatever, right? And so those are the kind of things where it's like, it's going to cause a problem. Don't be stupid. Don't do that. Don't be stupid and consume something that is going to give you problems when you're done with it. So no new foods. Don't be stupid. No alcohol. And really, we talked about hydration. Hydration takes 24 to 48 hours to adjust. So starting the day before, hydration for today started yesterday. Hydration for tomorrow starts today. So starting the day before, start buttoning up your hydration, especially if you traveled, because usually travel tends to dehydrate us. One thing that I'll note is I actually have separate protocols for like airplanes and jet lag and so on. But airplanes, just fun fact, their cabin humidity is held to a humidity that is more dry than the Sahara Desert. And it's no surprise that people who even say like, oh yeah, I slept on the plane, but they come off the plane and they still feel like they have no energy and they're fatigued. It's because you're dehydrated. The longer you're on an airplane, you're just bleeding out this fluid into the cabin air, and it's kind of nuts. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, you have to be really, really serious about drinking water on an airplane. Otherwise you're going to come out feeling terrible. And most people do. They come out and they feel like they're like, it's like, man, I just feel like I have no energy, I'm depleted and all this kind of stuff. And it's because you're dehydrated. That's what's going on an airplane. So anyway, so that starts the day before competition. Hydration is number one. And now we can actually move to game day, right? So finally, I don't know, like 20 minutes later, I'm actually answering your question, I guess. So a lot of my recommendations are going to depend on what time of day your competition actually is. But assuming that the competition happens later on in the day, just so I can have a discussion about what to do in the morning, that's how I'm going to proceed with this for now. So assuming your competition is later on in the day and there is an option for some kind of early morning food, like a breakfast buffet or something. So the first thing you want to do, hydration is key. I'll say it probably 10 more times, in the next 1 minute, but hydration is key. On game days, I'm a fan of drinking about 16 ounces of water right when you wake up. That's about 12 gulps of water. And if you can, to help that stick a little bit better, if you can get your hand on some extra electrolytes, that goes a lot better on game day. So that for me, the electrolyte mix that I go with, that I like the most when I'm at home, is you squeeze in about a quarter of a lemon and you pinch in some salt. You can also, there are some electrolyte packs that you can get that can do something similar, but I find that that's a pretty easy thing to set up. So a little bit of extra electrolytes with your fluid on game day. And then we come to the decision about breakfast on game day. And the thing that I want to highlight about this is highly individualized. Okay. Super, super individualized, because breakfast is a meal. I know a lot of dietitians and nutrition people, they're like, oh, breakfast, most important meal of the day. I'm sure everybody's heard that by now, right? Whether or not breakfast is the most important meal of the day for you depends on you, and depends on whether or not you are a habitual breakfast eater or a habitual breakfast skipper. So if you are someone who has never had breakfast for your entire life, okay, and then you heard a dietitian say, oh, breakfast is the most important meal of the day, I'm going to try out having a big old breakfast on game day, and this is the first time you've ever done it, that would be somewhat of a violation. This is in opposition to what your body is used to, and you might run into some problems. On the other side, if you are a habitual breakfast eater, you're like, I always, always, always eat breakfast, and you decide on game day, and I see this more often in esports. This is probably the most common situation. I have people who always eat breakfast, and then on game day, they feel nervous. Their stomach is jittery. They don't like to feel like they have anything in their stomach because it makes them feel heavy. They want to feel light on game day. I have a lot of players who tell me that. And so on game day, what they end up doing is they end up skipping their breakfast meal when they are used to having it, 99% of the time. But on game days, they skip it. This is also not the move. So where you run into problems is when you work in opposition to what your body is used to. Your body is a creature of habit. It likes to prepare for what you give it. And if you always eat breakfast at 9 a.m. and suddenly it's not there, your brain is expecting those nutrients, your body is expecting those nutrients, it's getting all the digestive juices going. It's like, I am ready for food. I have preempted every single system in my body to get this ready for this food that you're supposed to give me. And then, there's no food. And so now your brain freaks out. You're actually dumber as a result of that. And the people who say, oh, well, I like to feel light because I feel uncomfortable on game day if I eat something, that's more an issue with the particular food choices you're making, and not necessarily because there's an issue with the breakfast per se. And there are strategies to avoid this, so that way your stomach can feel nice and light and fine. But if you always eat breakfast, you should continue to eat breakfast on game day. If you skip breakfast, there's a little bit more latitude on this side. If you skip breakfast, you can still eat something, but just know that there will be a dip on the back end of that breakfast. So like you'll get a couple hours where it's okay, but there will be a dip after a few hours, and that dip needs to be rescued with either more food or potentially like some supplement, maybe like a caffeine or something like that. So the skippers have that little caveat. The people who are eaters, your choice is just eat. There is no choice. You have to keep eating. If you're always an eater, you have to keep eating on game day. So that's what we do on game day breakfast. And there are some people too who are like, oh, I skip breakfast. But then when I ask them, I'm like, yo, what do you do? And the first thing we're like, oh, well, I have a coffee and I have like a Danish from Starbucks or whatever, like a little pastry or something. And then I have like another snack later. If you're someone who has snacks in the morning to get you through the breakfast time block until you can have a real meal at like lunch, you are not a breakfast skipper. Okay, you are someone pretending to be a breakfast skipper. So just make sure that if you are really a breakfast skipper, a real breakfast skipper is someone who truly has no calories, for the first like several hours. And there's no real preference for one or the other. It just depends on who you are. But I know some teams where they're like, oh, everybody, we're doing, breakfast buffet, the entire team, let's go. We're going to talk about this while we all eat together. And it's like, that could throw some people for a loop a little bit. Or, the people who want to eat and then they say, oh, I can't eat because of the stomach, like that's going to throw them off a little bit too. So that's the morning in a nutshell. And I'll also mention, a lot of traditional, especially in NA, are breakfast platters at hotels and things like that. they suck. Like traditional American breakfasts are awful. Like it's not, the bagels, the pastries, the bars, like the fried stuff, like the hash browns and the bacon, like all that stuff is pretty much garbage. Like you don't want to be having that for your breakfast. A good quality breakfast, if you are opting to have breakfast, a good quality one should have a decent amount of protein in it. And the way to think about it could be, it should look like leftover dinner. All right. So maybe you have like a spinach omelet, or maybe you have, like a steak and maybe like some light home fries or something, or maybe you just have some oatmeal with a scoop of protein powder in it. The key here though is it shouldn't be too fatty, and it also shouldn't have too much fiber in it. These two things are particularly hard for the digestive system to handle. And on a day where, because of the high pressure, a lot of the blood that would otherwise be around your intestines is going to be ready for your fight or flight response. It's like kicked into action because it expects that you're going to be running away from a lion or whatever. So you don't have that same amount of blood to aid your digestive process. So you can't give your digestive system anything that's going to overly stress it. So we want to minimize our fats and our fiber, because those are the two hardest things for your stomach to be able to process and digest. So we're looking at mostly protein, mostly carbs, and light fat or light fiber, not anything too heavy on that side. Did I cover breakfast okay?
Yeah, so if you're let's say you only have shared food options and you're an eater, is it better to, is the non-negotiable that you still need to eat even if the options are shit and there is some amount of like fats or fibers there, like, because what takes more priority in terms of those rules, for example?
Yeah, and so it's a good question that I get a lot, but when I'm working with the team, that's a situation that should never happen. And
That's fair
any
enough.
team, the reason why is because you should have pre-planned for this. Like you should have looked at the hotel, you should see where you're staying, you should know what food options are available. And if there are no food options available, then you should have run to the grocery store, when you landed, picked up some yogurt cups, picked up like some fresh fruit, and just like throwing them in the mini fridge in your room. Like that is a situation that should never happen for a truly competitive and professional team that actually cares about their performance. You should not be walking in blind to your breakfast buffet and then finding out just when you get there that, I only have bacon and, terrible foods for me. So that would be my real response, is if you're actually a high competing team. And again, I get that question is completely fair because I get it all the time, but I tell them like, yo, if you're serious about this, why would you ever let it get that bad?
Yeah.
Like you should not let it get that bad. You should know, you should pre-plan, look up your hotel, look up the local food options, look up the local grocery store. You can pack stuff yourself too, right? Like at a minimum, you can bring like some protein bars. You can bring in like some trail mix, right? Like that stuff travels very well. You don't need to suffer on game day, but you really should be trying to get nutrients there. And I would say it'd be better to have pre-planned and pack some like smaller snacks to have for your breakfast than to have, the trash food that's at the buffet. But what was that? Did you hear that?
No, I didn't hear that. I think it's just you, Casey.
Okay, sorry. I just heard like a bell. Anyway, maybe I'm going crazy. Maybe I got tinnitus. Anyway, I would rather you pre-plan and have that figured out, so that way it doesn't get that far. That would be the best. But if you put a gun to my head and you said, okay, what is better? Is it better to eat trash or nothing? I would still say it's better to eat something, even if it's going to be trash. Have a smaller portion size. And the reason why I say it's okay here is because this is the breakfast meal, and my assumption was that the competition was really far away, right? So there's still plenty of time to process and digest that. But it's really key that you keep your brain doing what it needs to be doing throughout the day and used to that usual flow. So that's how I would answer that question.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I know that the sort of like 4-hour window is a thing before the actual competition, so we can cover that in a second. But I do want to, for everybody out there that's also, let's say, competing from home, if you're playing an online qualifier or whatever it might be, that probably describes most people, or a larger degree of people. So if you are at home and you have, of course, full control of what you're consuming, what would be some good, I know you said it's very individualized, but what are some good go-tos for varying types of people that are eating, that are things that they should be eating and things that they absolutely should be avoiding? I know you said sort of to avoid fatty, foods that are sort of somewhat high in fiber as well. But what are some good go-tos? What do you recommend people eat? What are easy? What are the best? What's the most optimal option?
Yeah. Yeah, I think for the gamer population, convenience is usually key. There are a couple go-tos that I'm a fan of, and I mean, it will depend on the person, but I'll list some ones that I've had some success with some players before. One is simply leftover dinner. If you have leftover dinner and your dinner was quality, you can have that again for breakfast. No big deal. Um, Second, if you want, there are loads and loads and loads of meal prep companies these days, right? And you can just get one and microwave that bad boy for 2 minutes, and you're good to go, right? You will be trading a little bit of cost for convenience in that scenario, but it's super easy, and those are pretty decently affordable these days. You're looking at like 10 to 15 bucks a pop per meal. It's not too bad. So those are some like really quick and dirty solutions. It's like, okay, if I have no time whatsoever in the morning, here's what I can have. And for that, I mean, if you just imagine, what would a healthy leftover dinner look like? I don't know. Maybe you have chicken, the classic bodybuilder meal, chicken, rice, and broccoli or something. Doesn't really matter. You're getting your protein, your starches, maybe a smidge of veg in there too, and not too heavy on the fat side. Now, if we are willing to put in a little bit of effort ourselves and make something on game day, some of the easiest things that I find to make are like what I like to call a prote meal, which is just oatmeal with a scoop of protein powder mixed in with it. And then from there, you can mix in, nuts and berries and whatever, and that takes like less than 5 minutes to whip up. My personal, I like to do a little bit of peanut butter and throw in like some banana slices on top with some like nuts and seeds and stuff, and then and then I'll do a chocolate protein powder, so it's chocolate, peanut butter, banana. It's amazing. You can also do like some yogurt cups. People will have like a bowl of yogurt with some fresh fruit and maybe some nuts and seeds and that kind of thing. If you are into eggs, you could do maybe like a vegetable omelet. Don't Most of the veg that you would put into an omelet is not too fibery, so it should be okay. Just make sure that you're not dousing that in. It's not like a fried egg. You're not dousing it in a bunch of butter or anything. Those are all pretty solid. I know some other people maybe like smoothies. Smoothies are pretty easy to whip up, pretty convenient, pretty quick. Throw yogurt as a base, throw protein powder as a base, whatever. Add in some frozen fruit, frozen veg, blend it up, drink it. Should get you pretty solid. I think those are probably the easiest, I would say, without too much effort. Another one that I really like is salmon lox. So that's just like a bagel with like some smoked salmon on top. I think that tastes really good personally, and that's like a nice, it's got the protein, it's got the starch. That's a pretty easy one to do also.
Got it. Well, I have a question because you're talking about we talked about that fats are like sort of a you got to be careful with the fats, but is there sort of an amount of grams that's too much or too little?
It's really tough to say because it's going to be relative to your own like body size and what your natural habitual diet looks like. Some people it's really interesting because when you do diet analyses on people and then you look at you can do a test to basically measure. What I'm going to say is probably going to be misinterpreted, but what we can measure actually is we can measure how good of a carb burner someone is and how good of a fat burner someone is. And where people usually misinterpret this is they say, oh, I want to be a better fat burner because I want to lose fat. When I say the word fat burner, I'm talking metabolically. And this has really like zero relation to your ability to lose, say, belly fat. This is purely metabolically how good is your body at utilizing fats as a fuel source. And we can measure that. And it's really interesting because we'll see actually different populations have different variances in this, and it's highly individualized where some people are just naturally really good carb burners. For example, a lot of Asian countries, when you look at their athletes, their traditional athletes, and we do this test on them, we can actually measure and we see that most of them are really, 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 really good at burning carbs. And I suspect this has to do something with their diet archetype over the last couple thousand years
Like
has
rice.
been very starch heavy. But we see that they are amazing at burning carbs, but they're not really good at burning fats. And then other areas we see that they're really, really good at burning fats, but not good at burning carbs. And so you can get this test done to see where your slant is. But really, what I'm trying to say is, depending on the person, that fat amount might be different from person to person, and so it's really hard to give a stock standard answer. But I would say, if it feels oily, like it's probably too much. Most people can probably get a good sense for that. Like if they had,
Mm,
like a breakfast burrito or something, and they're feeling a little bit down, you probably had too much fat.
yeah.
If you're trying to do it yourself, like if I was to make a prot meal, for example, I wouldn't put more than like 2 tablespoons of peanut butter in there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that
And
makes
then
sense.
yeah, and then maybe like a little bit of you could add in some nuts and seeds on top of that. But yeah, it wouldn't be more than like 15 to 20 grams of fat in that first sitting, I would say, on average.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. Because when you were saying trail mix before and you kept mentioning nuts, I'm thinking, well, these
Yeah.
are very high in fat,
Yep.
largely speaking. So,
Hmm.
so when that begged the natural question to me because I feel like you could very easily overdo that, and you
Yep.
could very easily be like, oh, well, nuts are just really easy. I could just have loads of nuts, but
Yeah.
obviously that wouldn't be a great choice. So
Yeah.
be somewhat sparing. You can get some fats, but don't overdo it. Just to
Yeah.
keep it to a minimum, and yeah, make sure that you're feeling just because if you have a lot of fats, your body will feel kind of just a bit more sluggish, generally speaking, as well. At least that's what happens for me. I'm not sure if it's that way for everybody, but try to get a feel for it, I suppose.
Yeah, and so I do want to highlight too that what I'm saying regarding this fat thing is, we're allowed a little bit more at this breakfast meal because I'm again making the assumption that game time is much later, like presumably in the afternoon or evening time. So I just want to make sure. So in that instance, your ability to tolerate a moderate amount of fat is okay. It's not going to do anything really negative to you. But if we're really close to competition, then I would, and we'll get there. But I wouldn't want you to have, like, a massive amounts of trail mix like right before competition because that's too close.
Yeah. So we'll get to that the window in a second before competition. I want to throw at you a couple of the things I used to do because there's usually been like two versions of stuff that I would have when I was competing.
Mhm.
That I felt worked for me, and I don't know. Well, I guess we'll see what your assessment is of it. But firstly, before I say that, I would always try to make sure that it was the same every
Mm.
game day. So how important is that? Is it super important? What are your thoughts on making sure that if you decide to do something for game day food wise, that it should always be the same? Question mark.
Mm. Yeah. This is another it depends answer, which I hate giving it depends answers because everyone always feels unsatisfied. But here's what it depends on. Okay, so I'll tell you the situations where it matters. I think that it's a smart approach, but it's not inherently beneficial per se. One, I think it's smart because you're used to it, but it has more psychological benefit than it does
Mm,
physiological benefit.
yeah.
A lot of times, a lot of athletes, they tend to get superstitious. I mean, that might not be the right word, but they're kind of like, oh, I have to always have this, handful of walnuts before I play, or eat an apple, or whatever it is, right? Like, there's this one thing that it's like they have to do. No, that's not a physiological thing. That's more a psychological thing.
Yeah.
And if you are someone who is, has that superstitiousness about you, then I would say go for it. Like, by all means, you can, and that's fine, and that's okay. The only thing that I think is potentially a negative in that situation is in esports, and at least a lot of the pros that I've worked with, there's a lot of times where you're traveling to other countries and things like that. And if your go to is something that's not readily available across the world or wherever you're realistically going to play, uh, be prepared to be thrown off. And that could be to your detriment, right? Because it's like, oh, I always have this. And then I travel to Korea and this is not a food that they sell here. I'm screwed. And now you feel like your entire day is at an L. So in that sense, that inherent inflexibility that you have demonstrated across your career could be to your detriment, in comparison to someone who says, "Oh, I can eat whatever I want before as long as it fits these nutritional parameters." So I would say if it's a food that is widely available across the globe and everywhere that you would possibly play, and it also fits nutrition parameters, then I really don't care if you do the same thing every single time.
Yeah, no, I definitely think it's the psychological element is really interesting because I do agree with what you said there. There is that I think that's going to be a topic for me to explore on the channel because I think it connects to a lot of other things too. That's because like you say, the superstition, it makes sense, but where that comes from is this, I think, fear of uh of, let's say, not being able to control everything to make sure that everything's going to be consistent, and
Yeah.
because the reality is you can't control everything. You could kind of be setting yourself up to fail a little bit with following that philosophical viewpoint, which then leads to that behavior and probably some other similar behaviors as well. So I think it's an interesting one to explore. So glad that you mentioned that. With that said, what I used to do on game day was one of my most sort of popular meals for myself was, I believed in oats. So much you already said that, the protein meal.
Yeah.
I
I love
did
us.
something similar where I'd have maybe a protein shake on the side, but I'd have the oats with. I would do it with water actually instead of with milk or anything like that. So I do it with water, and I put like blueberries and bananas in there as well as like nut butter of some kind.
Nice.
That used to be like, that would be the go-to, and I would have that usually like 4 hours, 3 to 4 hours before
Mm,
performing. So
okay.
that would be my go-to.
Got it. So the only thing I would say, so it's slightly different than my scenario because my scenario was this was a breakfast before potentially the pregame meal. The only thing that I would say is a downside to that particular meal that you mentioned is the lack of protein.
Mm.
And we do know that. So I usually am a fan of recommending having 30 grams of protein within 30 minutes of waking up. We call it the rule of like the 30 and 30. And that has numerous functions and potential benefits. But the one that's relevant here is simply protein is somewhat stimulating and it helps you wake up. So if you are having a breakfast that day, this is going to help kickstart your brain and just kind of turn it on a little bit faster. So I am a big advocate for at a breakfast meal, always making sure, presumably breakfast is in the morning, that the breakfast meal has some measure of protein in it. And again, this is somewhat body size specific, but 20 grams is a good minimum to think about unless you're like really, really tiny. And more often than not, I would say if you can push up to 30 grams, that goes a long way too. So for your particular meal, I love what you had in there. I think everything that you did is actually very performance minded and it works out and you probably felt nice and light and, good after having that. But I would still, even if that was a 3 to 4 hour pregame, I would still advocate for 20 to 25 grams of protein added into that. So I would have told you to add in a scoop of protein powder or mix in, like half a cup of yogurt or something to it just to like give that little kick to it.
Gotcha. Okay, so that kind of perfectly segues us too into this next topic of the window of performance, I suppose. I'm not really sure if you have a more technical term for it, but essentially this, something Casey talked to me a lot about with our players at 100 Thieves when I was with them, is understanding sort of firstly, what each individual would perhaps like want to eat the most and be the best for their performance, but also what the timing of that should be and how the timing affects the meal itself. So now that I've introduced that concept, how does it all shake out, Casey? So if you've got a game at, I don't know, 3 p.m.
Yep.
Or whenever is better. Hey, you should set the example because you're going to explain it. So yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. So, yeah, just assuming that we have a afternoon game time, doesn't really matter when. But yeah, I mean, 3 p.m. is fine. We can go with that example. So let's say players woke up around 9. They had a light breakfast. Um, well, okay, I want to divorce this from the breakfast that I mentioned. So when we talk about the pregame time window, we talk about the 0 to 4 hours before the pregame. And sometimes, if that overlaps with the breakfast, then essentially your pregame meal is the breakfast meal. If it doesn't overlap, then you can have two. And depending on the spacing of that, you might change the size of those meals. So, hypothetically, like let's say you had a player who ate breakfast at 9 and they were competing and playing at 2. Okay. So if I say 0 to 4 hours is the pregame window and we have a pregame meal 4 hours before 2 p.m., that puts us at 10 a.m., right? And if you ate a big old breakfast at 9 a.m., you're probably not going to have like much stomach space for another meal right here. So depending on those timings, like in this instance, I might say, okay, let's make the breakfast be really tiny. And then, this meal, we can kind of modify these two to make, the calorie amounts. But if they're separated by like a normal-ish amount, so if your competition is happening closer to like, 4 or 5 p.m. and then the pregame meal is happening around lunchtime, and then your breakfast is a suitable distance away that the breakfast can be a full meal, then we don't have to make any modifications to the sizing of either of those. But generally, when we're talking about game day and we talk about the pregame time window, how we define it is the 0 to 4 hours before game time. And typically, the best time to have a pregame meal is 3 to 4 hours before competition. That's basically best practice for both traditional sports and what I recommend for esports. 3 to 4 hours. And what this does is this allows you to, one, have a meal that is suitably sized enough to get all of the nutrients that we want to get in to get you ready for the game. But two, and probably most importantly, gives you enough time to actually digest that food before game day or before game time. Because you don't want to eat like Thanksgiving dinner sized meal 1 minute before you go out to play, right? You're going to be stuffed. You're probably going to be bloated. You're going to have food coma. It's not good, right? You can't go out with just like a huge full belly. You need time to digest that. And so 3 to 4 hours is about how long it takes for a lot of that stuff to start really getting through there. And so what we do is we scale the size of the meal based off of how far away from competition it actually is. So if you are, say, 4 hours away from competition, you can have pretty much a full-size meal, like a nice healthy portion-sized meal, nothing too crazy, right? Not Thanksgiving dinner, but pretty normal. If it's 3 hours before, it's going to be a little bit smaller. If your pregame meal is 2 hours before, it's probably going to be like a half portion. If your pregame meal is only 1 hour before, then it's going to look like maybe a big snack, and that's it, because you don't have too much time to digest it. So we scale the size of the meal based off of duration before actual game time. And I would recommend 3 to 4 hours is the ideal time to have a pregame meal. But again, we also have to take into consideration, what time was the breakfast meal or the previous meals. So that will edit it a little bit. But in general, perfect world, 3 to 4 hours, that's when we should be having our pregame meal. And you can have pretty close to a nice, full, healthy, balanced size meal. So that's the key thing that I want to say about that. And what I said before about what we're really trying to get in this meal is still relevant. So we want to have a couple things here. One, we want to have nutrients that our brain can use. Two, we want to have a suitable amount of food that we're not going to be starving by the time competition rolls around. Sometimes people have hunger pangs, and that can be distracting, and you don't want to have any measure of distraction that occurs during peak performance times. So you need beneficial nutrients. You need something that is not going to leave you hungry. And you also need something that is not going to stress and otherwise tax your system with, the act of digestion. So what can happen is certain foods. So like, let's say it's game day and you're lactose intolerant. You're probably not going to have a glass of milk right before you go out, right? Like you don't want to intentionally give your body something that is going to stress your system out. Similarly, you don't want to have anything negative in this time period that could detract from performance. And there are several examples of food items that acutely, so like in the several hours after ingestion, actually make you dumber, for lack of a better word. Like your cognitive faculties are significantly reduced. So we want to check. What was it?
What makes you dumber?
You want to make sure that you're not including any foods in the pregame meal that could make you dumber.
Okay, so the fatty stuff really.
Fatty, fiber, but I mean also like you don't want to chug like a handle of tequila right before you go out, right?
Okay, cool. Okay, fair enough. Okay. all right.
Like,
makes sense.
Like there are numerous examples of foods that could make your performance worse.
Okay,
so I just want to make sure that we're not ingest. So these are like some of the parameters that I look for when I'm trying to design what a pregame meal could look like for a team. And so as far as the sizing, we talked about that, right? We talked about the sizing, but specific nutrients, the brain uses the carbohydrate, and then we want some protein for satiety. So we want to leverage those two nutrients. We want the carbohydrates, simple carbohydrates, so not high in fiber. We're actually talking about things like white bread, plain pasta, sushi, like that kind of stuff, like white rice. We're talking about like very simple carbohydrates. And the reason why we want simple carbs, which is different from most days where I might advocate for more complex carbs. We want simple carbs on game day because, again, we don't want to tax that stomach, and we want to get stuff that is hyper digestible. We want it to be immediately digested and absorbed. We don't want it to hang around, and we don't want to tax the system when nerves are already high. And so what happens when, like fun fact, like whenever you feel butterflies in your stomach, that feeling, that physical sensation of butterflies in your stomach, what that actually is the blood that is around your intestines has left. And so that's the absence of blood in your intestines, and that's what you're
Ah,
feeling.
interesting.
And the reason why it does this is because it's gone to your blood to be ready to help you, run away and do your fight or flight
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
thing.
Right, that makes
uh,
sense. Yeah.
yeah, and so and similarly, like when you're doing a cognitive task, you want your brain to have all the blood, right? You want your brain to be able to function and carry, all the nutrients that needs to go up there, carry out all the waste products, get all the oxygen up there. Like you want the blood to go to your brain. Uh, and so if you eat a very heavy, high fiber, high fat meal, what happens is this is a very tough thing to digest. So one, now it forces a competition for the scarce resource, which is our blood. And now your body has to choose, do I want to help break down this food, or do I want to send it to my brain, or do I want to send it to my blood because you're going to run away from the lion? And so
But
there's this like,
can't the brain walk and chew gum at the same time? Can't it do multiple things at the same time? Or is it just an
uh,
efficiency thing? Has this been measured?
it's just an inefficiency thing. Yeah,
Okay,
it's like
okay.
it's just you have this competition now for this resource, which is somewhat scarce. Um, and when you put this extra option there, which is, oh, I want to put blood around the intestines, it makes it harder for your brain to get what it wants. So eating foods that have high degree of difficulty to digest is something that we really want to avoid. So the most common culprits I mentioned were the fibrous foods. So you don't actually want to have like a huge salad right before you go play. Salads are great and healthy for you, and I'm otherwise always advocating for you to eat, vegetables. But right before game time is not the time to do that, because that is a hard thing for your body to digest, and you don't want to put that competition for the blood between your intestines and your brain. Same thing with the fat. Fat is very tough. And then the other problem that happens when you put this competition here is that not only is the brain getting less, but the intestines are getting less because your brain is still trying to get some stuff, right? And so now your intestines are getting less, and now you're more likely to have like gastrointestinal distress. You're more likely to have gas and bloating and nausea and like just stomach cramps and things like that. And so now you've just like done a double whammy. You've made yourself dumber and you've given yourself physical pain, which is
Nice,
not
smart.
good. Yeah. So yeah, that sucks. So those are some of the key elements for this. And like I said, some of the most common foods that I like for this, you get your simple carbohydrate, easy to digest. You get a little bit of protein. Protein makes you feel satiated. Protein also serves as a somewhat of an alerting signal for your brain. Those are the two key elements that I want to include. We want to minimize those fat and those fibers. And then one other element that I actually want to mention about the fats is that when I talk about fats, most gamers know, they're like, oh yeah, fats are, if I eat fried chicken every day, I'm probably gonna get heart disease when I'm like 60. And most gamers will be like, yeah, I know that, but I don't care. And rightfully so, right? Like their priority is I want to win tomorrow or I want to win today. And so, okay, fair. But we also know that some of these unhealthy fats, and I'm looking at things like saturated fats and trans fats, and you can see these on the nutrition label if you're looking. But in short, it's like basically all the greasy, unhealthy fats that you can think of, like a fried chicken, like a pastry, like certain creamers and things like that. Like just butter. All of these things are very high in these fats, which actually, in the short term, over the next 6 hours after eating them, occlude blood flow everywhere, including to your brain, by about 15 to 20%. So you're actually measurably
That's a
dumber
lot.
after you after you have like a breakfast burrito or something, than in comparison to your meal, with the oats and the bananas and things like that. Like, so that's that probably worked to your benefit, but it's something to be mindful about in this pregame time window. Is like, okay, hey, I could actually, if I have these like fat bombs, not only is it going to have the brain's going to be worse, I'm going to be gassy and bloaty, and then also now I'm getting occluded blood flow everywhere, which just screws, it's the extra cherry on top, I guess you could say. So those are some of the food things that I'm thinking about in the pregame time. On the fluid side, I like to recommend that players drink 16 to 24 ounces 4 hours before competition. Hopefully they use the bathroom in the next couple hours. And if they don't use the bathroom, or if their urine is still like a darker color, then at 2 hours before drink an additional 8 to 12 ounces of fluid, water preferably. And then after that, they can drink, whenever they want to. But those are some of the fluid recommendations. If a team ate at 4 hours before, some people are probably going to start getting a little bit hungry, maybe like 1 to 2 hours before, and that's okay. And we can give them a small snack. And here, protein is actually somewhat, it's not the most challenging, but it's after fiber and fats, then protein, and then like carbs are the easiest. So protein is kind of next up on the chopping block for digestibility. So for a pregame snack, I usually don't, unless it's going to be like a really long competition, which is different than just like a 1 hour competition. If it's like, best of 5 or something. But if it's just a one-off task, what I would do is in the 1 to 2 hours before, if a player wants a snack, we're going to be looking at having, basically it's going to be a carb only, a simple carb. And one of my favorite snacks to give is just like a plain cracker or plain pretzel. It's hyper digestible carbohydrate, and it's got some salt on there, so that's going to encourage thirst, which is great. And it's not going to cause any GI distress or anything like that. So they can do that about an hour before if they want. And then if they want, there are some other snacks that they can do too, like some fresh fruit, berries, and grape juice. Both, I could talk about these if people are curious, but they seem to have some extra ergogenic potential, which is to say, I'd probably go with the crackers if you have a sensitive stomach. But if you want like some cognitive boosting, then you could go for one of these fruits. And we have some data behind grape juice, red grape juice specifically. We have some data behind orange juice, and we also have some data behind berries. So all three of those have different ergogenic potentials. I wouldn't stack every single one of these. I would just kind of pick one, but I would pick one of those, and that can give you a little bit of a cognitive boost on top of, all these other strategies that we're talking about.
It's funny
So
because like that's the natural thing. It's like, wait, all of these things are good. Okay, let's just put all of them together. That's
yeah,
like it's
no,
the most natural response ever. That's what I would want
I
to
know.
do.
Yeah, and so what I want to say is, like, if you do that, if you actually stacked all of those together, you're very quickly going to have a snack that is no longer a snack, and it's like a mini meal. It's going to be like way too many calories and way too much sugar all in one go. So I would pick one. So if you're curious, okay, so grape juice has been shown to relax a little bit. So if you're someone who's very, very stressed out about this, grape juice can relax. And if you get that relaxation effect, we actually have data that can also come with some boost in reaction time, which is kind of cool. The berries enhance cerebral blood flow directly, so you get more blood pumping to the brain, and you see an increase in
Any type of berries, any type at all.
Yeah, there's a small preference for some of the darker berries, like a blueberry, blackberry kind of thing.
Okay.
But pretty much any berry should have like I would do like a mixed berry. Like you can get usually those little fruit cups pretty easily at like hotels and stuff. So that would be my go-to, because each one does have a slightly different, unique benefit. But if I had to pick the category I would pick is the darker colored ones.
Okay.
And then, and everyone loves blueberries anyway, and everyone talks about them as a brain food, and it's partly true, but it kind of discounts the fact that there's a lot of similarities with these other berries. So all berries are kind of like, I hesitate to use the word superfood, but they kind of are in my mind. So like I'm a huge fan of pretty much any berry that you can put there. And so feel free to mix and match and find ones that you really like. But particularly the dark colored ones are really good at increasing the cerebral blood flow, which could be said to basically improve global intelligence, which basically means like every aspect of your brain is a little bit better, which is kind of cool. And then the orange juice seems to help out with pattern recognition and quick learning, which is really cool. You could also just eat an orange, but usually that's a little bit messy, and people don't like to do that right before they go play. But the pattern recognition and like quick learning is kind of like how that translates to gamers is like, can I read my opponent faster than he can read me? Can I figure out what his pattern is before he figures out my pattern? And can, that kind of thing. So pick and choose what you feel like you need. I would say there's no real downside to any one of them. And then the crackers is like, if you have a sensitive stomach, because that one's the most hyper digestible. So if you need a quick snack and you have a sensitive stomach because you're really stressed out or whatever, that would be the go-to. But yeah, so I'd pick one, experiment with them, find out which one works for you. They're all great for their own reasons, and find one that you like, and is also readily available at wherever your tournaments are.
Awesome. Okay, well, oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Oh yeah. Sorry. I mean, I can just like keep talking about any of this stuff forever. So anyway, yeah. What's up?
Yeah, so sort of quick recap. Essentially, you got your 4 hour window. You can have your full meal, 4 hours out, and then as you kind of get closer and closer, you want to taper things in. So you get to 2 hours out, maybe like half of a meal, like 1 hour out. It's like kind of like a snack, kind of sized situation. But let's say you're playing a long period of time. Let's say you're 2 hours in, 3 hours in, and you still got maybe another hour or two to go, and you start really getting that hunger, and you start to maybe even start to feel a little bit, maybe even the drop in energy that's maybe associated with your blood sugar going lower, or maybe there's your body is trying to essentially make you try to like essentially eat. So it's starting to release maybe hormones. Like, is it leptin? Is it leptin's hormone? No, that's a satiety hormone, right? That's I am
Ghrellin's
full.
the hunger hormone.
Okay, so that one starting to get released. I don't know. This is your thing.
Yeah. So it's a great question. So depending on the duration of your competition, it's going to dictate what your snacks can look like. So if you have a competition that is going to run for longer, equal to or longer than I would say about 4 hours, then I would try to put in some kind of repeat of what you had for your pregame meal, but in smaller quantity. So maybe it's just like half a sandwich or something like that, or maybe it's just like a couple pieces of sushi, or maybe it's just like a couple bites of the chicken pasta or some such. So that would be if you have a very long duration expected tournament or competition, and you're going to need a little pick me up somewhere in the middle. In that instance, get a little bit of extra protein. But again, it's going to be like a very mini meal. It's going to be like maybe a third of what a real portion would look like, maybe like a half a sandwich, that kind of thing. And that would be what I would recommend there. If it's less than the 4 hours, if it's like 1 to 3 hours in duration, this competition, then if you need a snack, what you can do is just do more of the same of what that pregame snack is. More berries, more crackers, more pretzels, that kind of stuff.
Are there any what strategies are there? Because I know you've talked to me about the what is it called, the carb mouthwash. There we go. Yeah. So I know you have like these smaller strategies. Could you explain the carb mouthwash and what the purpose is and other similar ones? Because I think it is especially in gaming, it does tend to often be for most people that they'll end up like, let's say if they're going through, they might play multiple like best of threes or something like in a day. It could be like a 12-hour thing. So if, and maybe you're not in a situation at that given moment when you actually have time to go and even have half a sandwich, but you're actually in the middle of performance. You're playing a map. There's at least like another hour until there's a break.
Yeah. The so the carb mouth rinse is a really interesting strategy that we borrowed from other areas, and I'm a huge proponent of this. There actually there's a mechanism that gets mentioned in some research circles, which is actually not true, but I find that it helps explain some of the concepts a little bit better. So what goes on is, so people can begin to understand this. But again, it's strictly, this is actually untrue, but I think it helps relay what's going on a little bit. So I'm going to use it for purposes, and I'll tell you what's actually the real on the back end. But how the argument goes normally is the brain is constantly checking its own levels of its own resources. So your brain has these little dipsticks out there, and it says, okay, how much of this fuel do I have? How much of that fuel do I have? And so on. And it constantly monitors this stuff. And whenever you're running low on one of them, it gives you a signal to go get more of that thing. And if it's getting dangerously low, then what it might do is it might start shutting down some of the systems that require that particular fuel source, because it says, hey, we're almost out. I can't let you do activity X because there's no fuel for it anymore. And if you do try to do this, I'm stopping you because I don't want you to hurt yourself, or I don't want us to get like catastrophically injured or damaged or whatever. So your brain is doing this subconsciously. You don't have to think about it, right? Which is kind of cool. Your brain is just doing this all the time. And one of the things that your brain keeps tabs on is its carb stores. Okay, it keeps tabs on its own carb stores. And carbs, as we know, are one of the primary fuel sources for the brain, for itself. So what happens is the brain is like, okay, you're really stressed out. I'm flooding the body with carbs. Or if you're exercising a lot and you're flooding the blood with carbs, or if you're just really stressed out and you're flooding the body with carbs, whatever it is, your brain starts to recognize that, my carb stores are starting to decrease a little bit. And as those stores start to decrease, the brain says, let's pump the brakes on activities that require this thing, because again, I don't want to hurt you, damage you, and so on. And one of the things that requires carbs is the brain, right? So if it starts to sense that these resources are running low, what it's going to do is it's going to downregulate its own functions a little bit. And so what a carb mouth rinse does is kind of fascinating. The carb mouth rinse is a process in which you hold some bit of carbohydrate in your mouth. It doesn't really matter what it is, but you hold some bit of carbohydrate in your mouth for an extended duration. You hold it in there for like 20, 30 seconds. Okay. You really give the tongue the sensation of a lot of carbohydrates. And this is unusual because normally, time on tongue is related to quantity ingested, right? Like you can imagine that if you have a carbohydrate that's on your tongue for an hour, you've probably eaten more than a carbohydrate that's been on your tongue for only 1 second, right? So the brain uses this as a proxy for how much carbs are actually coming into the system. And when it sees you hold this carb in your mouth, it says, oh, this is great. There's so much carbs on the way. This is amazing. Like, I don't have to pump the brakes on anything. There is so much carbs coming that it's okay. Yeah, my stores are starting to get low, but look at how much is going to be coming in here in just like a couple minutes. No biggie. And so then it says, I don't need to pump the brakes on these activities, itself included. And so the carb mouth rinse is really a way to trick the brain into thinking it has more resources than it really does. You don't have to ingest whatever it is you're using as your carb mouth rinse. You can if you want to. It doesn't really matter. You can ingest it or you can't. I don't care. But what it's really doing is it's tricking the brain into thinking that there is more resources than there really are. And so the brain stops pumping the brakes on you, and you're able to function at a higher level. And so what this actually translates to is roughly like an hour to maybe 90 minutes worth of a little bit of a cognitive boost. So I'm a fan of incorporating this in the immediate pregame time period. So it's like literally I'm about to walk on stage right now, or I am on stage, and I'm going to swish my mouth with a carb, and then there we go, we're good. And so a lot of teams, every team I've worked with has done it a little bit differently when I recommend this to them. Some teams will just have like a Jolly Rancher, and they'll have a bag of Jolly Ranchers that they hand out. The kids are sucking on the Jolly Ranchers before they play. Some people will have like a swig of like some juice, put it in their mouth, spit it out, no big deal. Some people will hold like a cracker in their mouth. Everybody's a little bit different. But the short of it is just whatever carb you want, you just hold it in your mouth for that duration, and then you immediately go perform. And then you can do this again, maybe every 90 minutes or so for a little bit of a cognitive boost.
Is there something that you recommend more than the others for any particular reason?
I really like anything that is, it's got to be a simple carb, right? So it's got to fit that criteria. So hopefully we're not like sucking on some, peas or lentils or something. We're sucking on, something that's basically the equivalent of like a pure sugar. And again, it doesn't matter if you actually swallow it or not. The one that I like the most, which I do for a lot of my like pre-workouts or like before tests when I was in school, is I would have a bag of chocolate chips, and I would just have like 2 chocolate chips that I'd sit on my tongue, and I just like let it sit there until they melted.
Okay.
So that was my personal favorite, but I don't really care what people use. But the one that I'll mention, which could be easy for a team potentially to implement, which has a potential additive effect. It's grown on me, but back when I was like in college, I didn't like doing this thing, which is chewing gum. So chewing gum actually has extra benefits outside of the fact that it potentially has some carbohydrates in it, and you can't get the zero free one or the zero sugar one. You have to get the one with like a little bit of sugar in it. But chewing gum in itself provides a cognitive boost.
Right. The mastication of has like some link to that, or is it?
Yeah, there's a lot of theories around it. Some of it has to do with just the fact that you are chewing and you're eating, which presumably is a sign that you are in a comfortable, safe spot, in contrast to like a fight or flight situation. So it activates the parasympathetic nervous system. I've heard other things. Some of the gums have like mint products in them and all this other kind of stuff, which are actually psychoactive compounds. But the short of it is that we do have a tremendous amount of data now, which shows that gum chewing does a lot of stuff. Like it boosts reaction time, shooting accuracy in an FPS, just concentration and focus. Overall, like reductions in stress because you're activating that parasympathetic nervous system.
Yeah.
All that kind of stuff. So I am a huge fan of gum chewing in people who like to chew gum, but some people really hate it and find it distracting.
Mm.
So I would recommend players experiment with it because there's zero downside outside of that distraction, but I don't make it mandatory. I say, but I think there's potential upside, and it's not like a, like even caffeine has potential downsides, right? But gum chewing is something where it's like, okay, well, there's literally nothing wrong that's going to happen. You're not going to get a side effect from chewing gum. So try it out, like give it an honest try. Try it on like, a week worth of scrim matches, see if you like it compared to a week without it. And, you'll quickly learn if you like it or not. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of people testing out gum at a minimum.
Yeah. That's something when I first joined 100 Thieves, I made sure that everyone had. Well, I got them all Neurogum, which some of them liked a lot more than the others. But I'm scared now that you're going to tell me that Neurogum sucks, because we talked about caffeine and L-theanine previously, and Neurogum is like, it's a gum or a company that has these products that are aimed at, it's a nootropic for better cognitive performance. And so I was like, that seems like perfect, and I really like the products, but are you looking at the ratio right now? I can see it.
I'm trying to like pull it up right now because I can't remember. I remember I looked at this like a year or two ago, and I don't remember what the ratio is. Yeah.
But gum is interesting because I heard many years ago, because back in like 2004 or so, I think it was 2004, when Quake 4 came out, there was a player called Toxic, and he famously chewed gum in like every single game, and he was like extraordinarily dominant. He like didn't lose. He like won almost every single tournament, and it wasn't just that he won them; he dominated everybody almost all the time. There was almost no one that could touch him for the duration of that. And at the same time, when I was like looking into it back then, I found out that supposedly it was something that in the circle of like of bikers, that people that they like to use it because of supposedly the cognitive benefits for reaction time and stuff when you're on like a motorbike. So apparently it was common in those circles as well, and that's when I was first introduced to that as a concept. So yeah, I think I bought you time. I bought you enough time to maybe look up the products. What have you found out?
No, I looked it up. So I mean, right off the bat, I mean, it's a gum, right? So gum is already going to have some benefit. I didn't know that bikers were into it. That's actually pretty.
Yeah, maybe that's bullshit. I mean, this is something I remember from like almost 2 decades ago. So
no, hey, I love. What I will say is I do notice that a lot of coaches, both in traditional and esports, like coaches and like support staff, I see a lot of them chew gum. And I was making this observation back when I was working in traditional sports, and I was like, why is it that like all these people are like gum chewers, right? And initially I was like, it's nothing, it's just, but then I like started doing some digging into it, and I was like, oh, there's actually something here. And like these, a lot of times people will say, oh yeah, all the focus is on the players, but the coaches and, the support staff, like they're dialed in, like they're thinking about what's going on also, because they got to, give their quick little like summary, like VOD review, whatever, like do their quick little discussion with the people in between the games, right? Like in between the plays and the timeouts and all this other kind of stuff. So like they're thinking the entire time. And it's just like, it kind of like surprised me when I saw so many coaches. And so anyway, yeah, I did some digging into it and didn't know about the bikers, but it seems to be, it's pretty convincing. The data is pretty convincing about it. But again, I do know some people who say that it's just distracting. They don't like the feeling of the thing in their mouth. So, that is what it is. And I would say, like, I respect that decision. Now, as far as Neurogum goes, so yeah, you're right. The ratio is a little bit different. I probably, go back and reference the talk that we had last time about the proper ratios. What we see here is 40 mgs of caffeine, 60 mgs of L-theanine, and then they give you a little bit of a B vitamin splash. And then there's like a smidge of some sugars. Looks like it's sugar alcohols. So sugar alcohols are something that I'm a little bit iffy on. Usually that if there is going to be an artificial sugar that gives people stomach issues, it's like 80% of the time it's the sugar alcohol. So admittedly, it's a small quantity though, so I'm not particularly worried about it. But that is a reality for someone who might have a sensitive stomach. The ratio is a little bit slanted on the L-theanine side. I would prefer a smaller dose of L-theanine personally here, but everything else, they don't need the vitamin B's in there. That's thrown in a lot of energy drinks and a lot of energy products. It does potentially cause a little bit of a mood lift, but it doesn't do anything physiologically. So there's some pluses, there's some minuses here. There's actually something that the military uses, it's just called military energy gum, and I think it's just like 100 mgs of caffeine per stick, and it's just like a very easy way to digest. And fun little note too, by the way, about caffeine in gum chewing form. This is really good for physical tasks. I mean, it's also good for cognitive tasks, but I want to highlight that there is an extra additive benefit if you're using this as like an actual pre-workout in place of like a traditional pre-workout thing. And the reason is because when you're working out, same thing, all of the blood is going to your muscles instead of your intestines. And it's much harder for you to digest and process the caffeine that's coming in through an oral route. But when you chew it, it gets absorbed directly through like the tongue and the saliva. And so you bypass the intestines and you just go straight into the system. So it hits faster and you don't have to deal with that issue where it's not going to actually get processed well through the intestines. So that actually has like a fun little application there. And I'm a big fan of recommending caffeinated gum for pre-workouts in place of like an actual pre-workout.
Gotcha. And that wasn't a hard no to Neurogum. So Neurogum, if you're listening to this, please reach out. I would love to have you as a sponsor for my podcast. Lovely.
Not a hard no. Be careful about try it out yourself, but be careful about the sugar alcohol. And then also, if the L-theanine was a little bit less, I'd be happier personally.
One thing that I guess I liked about it, and it's different to I think a lot of the energy drink products, and I'm sure this will end up being something we talk about a bunch of times, but it's just that the dosages are ultimately like kind of low. Like it's like 40 milligrams of caffeine as opposed to, which is like half a cup of coffee roughly, right? And a lot of the energy drinks you'll have, it can be up to like 200 milligrams in like one hit. So it's like, geez, it's hard for you to modulate that yourself. But with this, you can kind of, better, I think, just like Casey said, go listen to the episode we did on caffeine and L-theanine to get sort of the lowdown from Casey on exactly what you should be looking at in terms of your ratios and how you can be working out your individualized dosing and how you can be a bit more kind of accurate than necessarily going out and sort of just buying a product where it's kind of already predefined for you. But it's not one of the worst ones out there.
Yeah, and so the thing that I'll say about this, which is to its credit, is you're absolutely right that it's sometimes really hard to dose with a lot of these prepackaged products. And in America, it's actually illegal now to have a powdered caffeine. There's a lot of people who accidentally killed themselves back in the heyday because if you take too much caffeine, your heart explodes.
Right, of course.
But so it's illegal to produce a pure powdered caffeine. So like pre-workouts and stuff, they skirt the issue because even if you take a full scoop, it's not all 100% caffeine in there. There's like fillers and stuff now. So you can't accidentally overdose and kill yourself. But in the pill forms and in like the gum forms and in like the energy drink forms and all that is like a stock standard dose, right? And usually it's very high, like you said. So it's very hard to titrate and find because I made recommendations based off of your body weight in the last podcast. I was like 1 to 3 mg per kg body weight, right? How are you going to titrate, something that is like a 200 milligram pill? It's like really hard to do that, to titrate a 200 milligram pill. So with something like the Neurogum, which is nice that it is a low dose, is the fact that you can stack these to hit that you want. And again, I might not agree with the exact L-theanine ratio, but the short is because it is a low dose, you get that added flexibility of being able to scale what you want. But you're right, it's not going to hit as hard as like an energy drink, but maybe that's not really the point of this, right? Like this product has a different use case, I think.
Yeah.
I would say that the use case for this is not actually someone who like if you asked me and I said, oh, I want to reach for an energy drink right now because I want some stimulation, I want some energy, I would not say it's a 1-to-1 substitution to instead reach for a piece of Neurogum. Like that just wouldn't substitute well at all. But there are other situations where the Neurogum could be beneficial. Maybe you're a little bit sleepy, or maybe you're really, really stressed out, so you need that extra L-theanine. But you still want some of that caffeine. So there are like use cases for it, but I wouldn't call it a one-to-one substitute for like an energy drink product.
Got it. Okay. Well, with that said, we've got about 6 minutes until we're at the top of the hour. So um, I know that we've done a decent journey across sort of game day protocols and nutrition and so on. Is there anything else to sort of wrap up that topic?
Yeah. Okay. So there's a couple things I want to highlight. The first one is the first meal after you're done for the day. So the post game time. So up until now, we've been avoiding all of those wonderful healthy fats. We've been avoiding all that fiber and all that kind of stuff. And we may even have been avoiding the portion size being too big. At this post game meal time, this is where you should get all of that stuff in. Okay, this should be a nice full meal, nice and balanced, nice and healthy. Get all that fiber that we've been avoiding, get all that fat that we've been avoiding, and if you hope to learn from this, then make sure it's healthy food too, please. And especially if you have a second day of competition, then we kind of repeat the process beforehand, which is, okay, don't be stupid, don't have anything crazy, you got to hydrate and no alcohol and all this and that, right? And I can't tell you how many teams I've seen where they pull off a clutch win on day one, go party, and then on day two they come in and then they just like, shit the bed basically. And it's like, okay, well, that's what happens. You should have been professional. If you win the entire series,
2+2,
go party, have a good time. But like, if you have more days of competition, treat it, be a professional. And that post game meal is really instrumental for you to, if you are hoping to learn between day one to day two, you need to make sure that post game meal is really, really high quality and buttoned up. So something that, is going to, maybe it's just like, a salmon fillet over like some quinoa with some broccoli and a side salad and all this kind of stuff, right? Like everything that you can envision that's healthy, like you should have that as your first post game meal. And then we repeat all the steps again. And I think that's probably the last thing that I want to say about this, this journey from like pregame to postgame.
Awesome. Right, and if any of you guys have questions, of course, like please leave them in the comments, and we're sort of monitoring things as it goes, answering things as they kind of come in, but also looking for sort of like, okay, what's maybe a part that maybe people have a common sort of misunderstanding about or a common desire to have explained more, and so we can kind of essentially respond to that. Maybe we'll make something additional just standalone for that purpose to answer those questions in particular. But I think the next ones that I'm interested in, Casey really wants to, as he is very, very much in the supplement world, to kind of lay down sort of the foundational knowledge around that and how it all works, so that you guys will be armed with a lot more knowledge, so you can make better choices when it comes to understanding, whether you should use supplements, what they're supposed to do. Do they actually do that? What is maybe a better substitute for that, as opposed to just reaching for the supplement, answering all of those types of questions. And then honestly, there's lots of other areas as well, to be honest, to cover. So I'm pretty excited to be on this learning journey with you, Casey. Thank you so much for brandishing us with all of your knowledge.
Yeah, no, it's honestly a blast, and like, thank you for letting me talk about something that I enjoy so much, because I am a total dumbass in like so many arenas, and it makes me feel like I kind of know something when I'm able to talk about it. I just get really excited about it. So I apologize if sometimes the answers seem long-winded, but I'm really excited about this. Like, I just love talking about this. So I'm excited to do more. And yeah, if anybody has any questions, concerns, like, I'm more than happy to do whatever I can to try to address those and help you out.
Awesome. All right. Cheers, Casey. Until the next one then.
Yes, sir. Take care.